Hello, everybody, and welcome to Seattle Boat Show Live. This is your July 1st edition. And for those of you tuning in from Canada, happy Canada Day. And we'll talk a little bit more of what's going on with Canada Day. You may have noticed I'm all alone here. They've entrusted me with this whole thing. We'll see how it goes. We've got Katie Grossclose filling in for Katie McPhail, handling all the technology in the background, and Leonard and Lorena are up in Gustavus, Alaska, near Glacier Bay, and they thought they would be tuning in, but we haven't seen them come in yet. They may come popping into the show at some point. Peter Schrappen is somewhere between here and Hawaii, and George Harris is with his family, so you got me. So I'll do the best I can. I can have a few things that we can talk about tonight, and we've got a great guest, and Wayne Evans will be popping into the show in a little while after we get through some announcements, and we'll talk about demystifying outboard motors. And we're going to have a lot of fun with Wayne, and he'll be able to fill us in on some really good information about maintaining your outboard motor, how to save some money, and some things you probably don't know. So we'll save that for a little bit later. First is an update on COVID-19. And the question I always get every week is, Mark, when do you think the border's going to open? And I've been telling people that we're probably looking at, I think, the end of August. Other people think and are more optimistic than me. They think the end of July, and it could go into September. The political situation seems to be changing a little bit. There's a fair amount of pressure on Prime Minister Trudeau to open the border. On the US side, President Biden has indicated that it would be good to get the border open. And Trudeau has set some numbers to say that he's looking for 75% of the Canadians to be vaccinated at least once, and about 20% twice. And we're getting close to those numbers. So let's keep our fingers crossed, and we'll see whether it's, some people are saying end of July. I'm a little pessimistic about that, but I'm optimistic about August and into September, and certainly optimistic that next year the border will be open, and that'll be fun. So that's where we stand on that. In terms of what's happening in the San Juan and Gulf Islands, we have been at the Wagner Guide been making reservations for ourselves and some of our customers at the marinas, and all I can say is that things are filling up fast. Roche Harbor is not taking reservations, as we've said before. Their recommended procedure is for you to come in early on a morning that you're looking for moorage, call in, they'll put you on a list, and they'll call you in as room opens up. So they're going to try to fit everybody in. And of course, you can always anchor out in the bay in front of Roche Harbor. It's a good mud bottom, and we've anchored out there and not had any trouble at all. And so that's a consideration if you're planning to come out for the 4th of July weekend. Roche Harbor will have their fireworks last, we've been told, and that's still the plan. And so will a number of other communities. In Canada, for our Canadian viewers, we generally have found that fireworks are not going to be happening. They are planning fireworks up in Nanaimo, but other than that, it's a very subdued Canada Day, which would be fireworks tonight, and probably not going to be happening. And a lot of that is out of respect for the tribal residence schools that some of you may have read, that one residence school, they found the graves of about 700 children. And generally, the country is observing this with a period of mourning, and a very unfortunate situation, but part of what they're dealing with in Canada. So it'll be a very subdued night tonight for Canada Day. And we still want to wish our best to our Canadian friends for Canada Day. Normally, I'm in Canada for Canada Day, but not this year due to the border being closed. Leonard and Lorena passed on a number of reports from Southeast Alaska. There are quite a few American boats up there. We estimate about 150 to 200 boats that are touring between different places. Rob and Jean Warner reported back that there's quite a number of American boats in Sitka Harbor and visiting Sitka. Leonard and Lorena have run into American boats in Juneau and Petersburg and Wrangell, and of course in Ketchikan. So quite a number of boats did go up on the Express Transit Passage, where they limited exposure in British Columbia and did the quickest possible trip up to Alaska, and that worked out successfully for them. So quite a bit going on, and if you're planning your Alaska trip for next year, we'll be happy to help you, and we'll have our seminars as usual. We're planning multiple flotillas for next May to leave to go up to Alaska, and generally let us know if you're at all interested. Send us an email or call the office, and we'll do everything we can for you. For July 4th, as I mentioned, Roche Harbor will have fireworks. Anacortes will have fireworks. And you might want to call ahead to find out places that are going to have fireworks or other parades or celebrations to celebrate the anniversary of our country, the US. So a lot of people are planning to go out boating. I recommend that you have patience in your search for moorage or anchorage, and we can all fit in. We've got one of the most beautiful places in the US, if not the world, to cruise, and there's plenty of room for all of us. So get out there and have fun. Some people have been asking, well, Mark, where are you? Well, I have my Zoom background on with the icebergs and the LeConte Glacier behind me up near Petersburg, Alaska. But I'm actually on the other side of the country. As soon as it got hot, and all of you noticed we got hit over 100 degrees in a number of places, I headed east, and I'm in Sarasota, Florida tonight. Beautiful weather, cool. We've had some rain and some thunder showers, but I'm going to be headed right back to my home port of Anacortes on Tuesday after the 4th of July holiday. So it's always fun. If you're tuning in tonight from an exotic location, shoot us your location on the chat line, and I'll do a shout out to you and say hello. Last week I reported on an unfortunate situation. We had race week Anacortes, fabulous event, a lot of great racing that went on. But last Tuesday, we had an unfortunate fatal accident. And information came out over the last couple of days what happened. And I think this is a little bit of a lesson of how things can go wrong. We had a very accomplished sailor working on the foredeck of a J boat in the race, and he stepped out, and the spinnaker line, as the spinnaker filled up, it wrapped around his leg and literally ejected him off the foredeck and into the water. And unfortunately, he was dragged along by the boat while the crew slowed the boat and were able to bring him on board. Estimates were that he was only in the water for about 10 minutes, but he was definitely in trouble. And they did CPR and everything they could, but unfortunately, he passed away. And the lesson for this is, this was a very experienced sailor. He knew what he was doing. He had a PFD on, and yet this unfortunate accident happened. And I think the lesson to all of us is even with the best precautions and the best care, sometimes it happens. And it's good to have, and now this was a very experienced crew, and it still took them about 10 minutes to slow the boat that was dragging him through the water and get him out of the water and back up on deck. And unfortunately, the consequences were fatal. And I always try to, in my teaching, in classes, to talk about how do you get somebody out of the water. And we teach you to using the life sling and being able to lift somebody out. And not an easy task when you've got somebody who's weighing 200 pounds, 225 pounds to actually get them out of the water and be able to save them. And in this particular case, it unfortunately did not work. And hopefully we'll all be really careful in how we do our boating this year. So hopefully this is the only fatal situation we'll have. The general status of the marinas and restaurants is many are full. It's hard to get reservations, and even hard to get reservations all the way through July and in August. So please be patient. There are places like Friday Harbor who will only give out reservations for about 30%, 35% of their transient slips. The rest they keep available so for people who show up that day. So it's always worth trying, and use patience, have flexibility, be prepared that you might have to anchor, be ready to anchor and know how to anchor, and you'll still have a great time out on the water. So if you haven't made reservations, try it. Don't be surprised if the places that you want to get into are full. So many of the most popular ones, like Rosario, has very limited space left. I mentioned Roche Harbor with doing reservations as you show up, and other places are filling up very, very quickly. So patience and be careful out on the water. As always, feel free to put your questions for tonight's show up in the chat line. I'll relay them to our speaker. And with that, why don't we introduce Wayne Evans? Wayne's going to come popping up. You'll see him there. And Wayne, if you turn on your video and your audio, you will be live and on Seattle Boat Show Live. A little background to Wayne, and this will get him up faster because I'm going to talk about Wayne until he shows up on screen. And Wayne recently started at me. Oh, there you are, Wayne. How about your video?
It won't let me turn it on. It says you cannot start to host because video has disabled it. She must know what I look like.
All right, I'll see what I can do about getting you going. But Wayne, give us a little background about you. I've known you for a number of years, and I know you retired from a prior career, which I'll let you talk about because I think it's interesting. And then you decided that retirement wasn't enough. You decided to start your own business, and there you are. Your video's up now. Thanks, Wayne. And you started Anacortes Outboards, something we needed. Why did you do that? You were retired, Wayne.
So some people have said I failed retirement, but basically I don't sit still too well, and I've always been a tinkerer. So that's kind of how I started in the whole thing. I built my first car. I built race cars and on and on and on. And then my prior career, as you mentioned, was a family demolition company, and we had numerous tractors of all sizes. I've always been a horsepower nut. I've always loved big stuff, and coming along with that, we break a lot of tractors, and so you got to learn how to fix stuff. So I was that guy. So so I learned pretty early on.
Wayne, you're a demolition expert. Does this mean if something will not run, you have the ultimate end for it?
Well, if something won't run, I got to make it run if I want to work. And when I was young, that's just kind of what we did. We did break a lot of tractors. It's a rough business, but so that really taught me how to be fairly fearless about fixing stuff, because I mean I dove into things I couldn't afford to have fixed, and I needed to learn how to do it. So being fearless is one of my high qualifications.
I imagine, and your training and how to handle dynamite certainly gets you to the point of being fearless.
We actually didn't use that much dynamite. We had a quarry and we used to shoot some rock, but handling dynamite, I left to other people. I have all of them.
Good, good.
But, yeah, so that is kind of where my background and mechanics comes from. And I just saw boats as waterborne tractors. And then I retired, moved up here. I eventually bought a boat with a big outboard on it. And my experience of getting it serviced and getting it worked on was not good. So, and my friends were having the same difficulties. So I started helping teach them how to change their own oil and how to get out of some of these things that were making them unhappy. And it was, so eventually, and then this shop that I'm in showed up. Just one of my friends called up, said, "Hey, there's a place down there open." And that's how that all came to be. It just kind of fell right in my lap.
I want to pick on one point that you said in a positive way, and that's that you would teach your friends. And that's one thing I know about you, is that when you're involved in a repair, if the customer is there, you use it as a teaching moment. You've done this with my brother, with trying to help him fix his equipment, and my son, and trying to help him, who's a airplane mechanic, but you've shown him how to fix his outboard. And I really commend you for that you take the time to teach.
Well, I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And yeah, it's very satisfying. And it's not, it's actually safer to know some things, about your own boat. When the more you know, the less panic you have on the water, and the more comfortable you are. And actually the safer you are. Because if you've never looked at your engine and you lose something with a fuel filter, which is highly likely, especially if you're traveling around, you know where to go. You know how to fix it. You know how to swap it out and at least take something, take a stab at it. So I actually think you're safer as well. So
I agree completely. And God, there are many times I wish you were with me while I was out boating and my outboard wouldn't start. And what are the kinds of problems that you see most frequently where people run into a problem and they call Wayne? What is it?
Most of the problems are fuel problems. Most of them have to do with ethanol fuel. Most of them have to, when this stuff sits around and dries out, when you put your boat away for the winter, people think that they run the gas out of their carburetor or their fuel injection system and it runs out, and that's good enough. But there's still enough in the bottom of the bowl. All you did was, I don't want to get too technical, but the main jet sucked air, and so now the engine won't run. But there's still a ½ inch of gasoline in there that's going to dry up and turn to powder. Our gasoline with ethanol turns back to corn. It's awful. And if you're dealing with small outboards, especially the small ones, the jets in them are so tiny that they plug really easily. I unplug them. I've used acupuncture needles, 10,000 guitar strings. I mean, I use it, whatever kinds of things I can find, because some of those holes are just really tiny and hard to clean. And when they're plugged, it just isn't going to run, period.
What's the remedy to that in the fall? You've just kind of killed it, that I can't just disconnect my fuel tank and starve the carburetor. There's still fuel in there. What should I do?
Well, if you can get to the drains, on the drain bowls on most carburetors, they have drain screws where you can drain the fuel out of the bowls. That's safe if you do that. Or you can put some good Stabil in it. Or what I started doing to my fuel, I have a 350 Yamaha that's fuel injected. What I started doing with it is they're making this Opti 2-stroke fuel, two-stroke oil. And I mix up a small batch of that and I run 2-stroke oil through my fuel injectors. And when it smokes a little bit, I shut it off. Now they're all oiled up. So It's
Okay,
just,
so let me get this straight. You've got a 4-stroke engine. You're
do.
actually putting some 2-stroke mixture
yes,
into your tank so that you run it for 15 minutes or so.
in a separate tank.
Okay, separate tank.
Oh yeah, I'm just connecting the boat fuel line because my boat carries 160 gallons of fuel. You don't play with that much fuel, but yeah. So whatever you can do to stabilize that fuel. Stabil is a good product. Try to use, even put Stabil in it, even if you're using non-ethanol fuel. If you're using ethanol fuel, it's just going to bite you eventually. And everybody has to use it at some point. It just isn't available everywhere. So carry some Stabil and put it in there. If you're running in the season and you're running every day and you're going fishing, it doesn't matter. It's not going to catch up to you until you let it sit. That's when it goes bad. So everybody thinks they're getting away with it, and then until they shut down for the winter, and then they go to start up and they wind up in my shop.
Yep. So Stabil is an additive. I can get it at West Marine. Can I get it at an auto parts store?
Marine Stabil, and in Anacortes, the auto parts stores carry it. Marine Stabil, and put as much in there as it tells you to, and it will. Because the other lovely thing about ethanol fuel is it pulls moisture from the atmosphere. So you're actually making water in your fuel. So it really couldn't be much worse than that. But like I said, when you're in the summertime and you're running, you're burning and fishing and not sitting around, fine. But when winter comes and you start slowing down your use, really start taking care of your fuel and get ahead of that.
And to put some perspective to this, I think you told me over the phone that something like 80% of the problems that you get called out to fix somebody's engine is related to this same problem. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I'd say closer to 90%.
Wow. So Stabil and watching that and not letting that sit would prevent many, many problems.
Yes. Whatever you can do. And the smaller the motor, actually, the more care it needs, because like I said, the orifices are so tiny, it really doesn't take anything to plug them. And once they're plugged, it's just not going to run. Now you got to take the carburetor completely apart and figure out how to clean these tiny holes, these tiny orifices, which are, it's a challenge for me, and I do it all the time.
So that's real good advice on fuel and what the most common problem is. What's the second most? Is it impellers, or is it lube to the lower unit, or what?
I see some of all that. Not really too much. Oil changes, get away from people. Fishing line wrapped around. I've had some customers that I had to call and tell them some real bad news, getting fishing line wrapped around their prop and taking the seals out and filling their lower unit with water. Those kinds of things. So it's important to look at your lower unit oil every year. It's important to change your oil, whether you use the boat or not. I mean, every 100 hours is what I think every manufacturer pretty much recommends, or once a year. But a lot of that is really just to take and see what you got. The oils that we have and we're using in these outboards, if you're using outboard motor oil, it is good stuff. It really is high quality oil, but they still want you to change it every year at a minimum.
And is that something an owner can do themselves? Is it easy enough in most motors, or do they need an expert like you?
It depends on the motor. Most Yamaha motors, I can teach somebody how to change their own oil without any problem at all. It needs to be done on the land. You don't want to do it in the water. The lower unit oil you can't do over the water because it actually has to hang and drain. And the environmental problems with trying to do it over the water is just ridiculous. But so I have had people ask me to do it, and I just don't. It just isn't a good idea. But the work itself is not hard. It isn't. It also gets you familiar what your engine looks like underneath the hood. A lot of people I tell never
And
had the
again,
hood.
I think that's the most amazing thing. I've heard of mechanics who don't want customers around, and you look at it as a fun part of the experience.
Yeah, it can always get interesting for sure. But
Okay, so what's the dumbest questions somebody's ever asked you?
geez, I don't know. Are there
Okay, I won't hold you to that one. I'm sure there are a few. I mean, we've run into several out boating, and one of my favorites is somebody going by Limekiln Point on the west side of San Juan Island and asking, what time do the whales show up? You know, so, but anyway, but we run into them, and I appreciate that. So managing the fuel, managing the oil, and I mentioned impeller a little. How often should the impeller be changed out?
Well, they want you to look at it once a year. I think that's excessive. Every 3 years, you should drop the lower unit and take a look at the impeller, or just change the impeller every 3 years. That's a good basic, unless you're having a problem. If it's not peeing, if it's getting hot, then obviously you're going there. But there's another good reason just to drop the lower unit, and that's to get grease on those bolts. Don't let those things sit around where they're froze up. I've done jobs where I've actually had to put the lower unit, actually taken a come along and boated 2x12. And this guy was just in love with this motor. He's buried in this motor and just loved it. I was extending it for him, and it was so froze up. It took me a week just to get it popped apart. Now, I didn't charge him a week because they were holding on to it, but I used this 2x12 just as a big bow, pulling on it and squirting penetrating oil on it for a week. And eventually I got a little crack. And then it was like, Chris, I think it's going to come. And anyway, this little $500 motor, he spent $2,000 on and was happy as could be. That's not my average customer.
Yeah, it's not my average spend either.
Yeah, he got what he wanted. He was it is a good little motor. It's a little 20 horse Tohatsu, and he was just tickled to death that we made it work. But yeah, getting those things apart and getting a little grease on the bolts and just making sure everything is coming apart nice and is serviceable. Because if you just let them sit, it'll get ugly.
So take us through at the end of the season. We'll assume most of our viewers, they've got their boat. They may have their outboarder on the dinghy like I do. And I'm pretty much ready. It's running great. I'm going to run all season long with it. What should I do at the end of the season?
At the end of the season, make sure that your fuel is taken care of. If it's fuel injected, make sure you've got stable that you've run in there. It's a good idea on late model motors. Like what I do is, I told you I hooked up this Opti 2. It's actually mixed in Blaine. It's a 2-stroke additive that takes the place of the 2-stroke oil, but it doesn't smoke. And I run it in my 4-stroke just to kind of pickle it and fog it. So there's a little oil in the cylinders. There's a little oil on the injectors and all the injection pumps. Everything's got a little lubrication that's going to stay wet through the winter.
So does that mean when you're putting it into your tank or into an auxiliary tank to run into the motor, you run it until you're dry, until it's starved?
No, you can see a little smoke. You'll hear the difference. It'll be running and you'll hear it kind of sound a little bit different and start to smoke maybe a little bit and go, okay, that's it. And then just unplug it and make sure there's no water hanging in it to where in our area it could break for sure. So,
in other words, you don't want anything hanging in there that could freeze when
right.
we get extra cold. and expand and actually break the that area of the motor.
Break the engine block, yeah, break a head, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's what I do at the end of the season. So in a way, when the term is sometimes called that, I've pickled the engine for the winter.
Fogging, yeah.
Yep, got oil in there, and then it sits all year. I have it through the winter stored in a reasonable location, and then spring comes along, and what do?
If your oil's been changed and you're all ready to go, you basically fire it up and just go fishing.
Got it.
You check the oil, you do your due diligence, of course, but that's it. I mean, have it ready to go, and it'll light when it's supposed to. If the worst case is if it's overfogged, you get foul plugs, but I've never had that experience, and neither of any of my customers.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. And you mentioned 2-stroke and 4-stroke, and I happen to run with a 2-stroke engine. And the reason I do is because I have my dinghy up on Weaver davits, and I decided I was going to leave my engine on turned sideways. So, and that way with a 2-stroke, it can run. Some 4-strokes, many 4-strokes, do not work well if turned sideways. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's down to even you can lay them on one side, and it's a disaster if you lay them on the other side. So you got to pay attention to that. The other advantage of the 2-stroke is they're very light for the horsepower you get.
Yeah.
So but they're not as popular. They're a little noisier, and they're a little more of this. And there's not very many of them left.
I was going to say, I don't think you can buy one today unless you go to a foreign country.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you can. Oh, that's an interesting thought on outboards. I've run into that a few times, is outboards that are made in Canada. You can't find parts for them here.
Oh, interesting.
You take a picture of your serial number and you call up your local dealer and you say, I got this Yamaha and this is the serial number. He goes, no, we don't have that. So we're close enough to Canada where a lot of those things come in here, and then you're stuck with, well, how do I come up with parts? Well, there's a lovely lady up in Campbell River who understands, and she's a Yamaha dealer, and call up there and give her the part. I say, I can't buy parts from you because I don't know how to get them here. But
yeah.
So during COVID, and she was just really cool and helped out one of my friends get out of a jam, because the local parts guys were just going, I don't know what you got. Well,
yeah,
yes,
that's interesting. I had no idea that the parts in Canada were different. Very good advice for those of us who may have bought a boat up in Canada. So I think we all assume they're universal parts, but did not know they're not. Interesting. Now, Wayne, go ahead.
No, that's it.
What kind of parts should I carry with me on the boat? So I carry a spare prop. I carry a shear pin. I even carry an impeller. What else should I have that I would carry with me on that boat or nearby that boat?
Wow, that's a lot. I would think very first thing, fuel filters. Because you can pick up bad fuel, and that's just a game killer. If you can get past that, you're going to need new fuel filters.
Okay.
Carrying a shear pin and that stuff, you're way ahead of most people. Most people, I mean, there aren't even that many engines that have shear pins anymore, the late model stuff. I would say if you have a plastic propeller, you should have one of those and a way to put it on. But most of those are just held on by a cotta key. So a cotta pin and a plastic prop. A thermostat might not be a bad idea but if you've done your maintenance, so you really probably are not going to have any problem with your thermostat. They do go bad, but You're talking, you're not my average customer that goes out for long visits and
Right.
uses.
Okay, good advice. I'll leave the impeller home going forward. I hear you. I wondered how I would be able to get in there and change the impeller without getting the boat out of the water and all of that. But yeah,
That's not going to happen. That's pretty ambitious. For your average boat owner, that's pretty ambitious.
yeah.
When I go to Canada, I don't take an impeller. I take a telephone.
Well, yeah, that's a good. I have your phone number, so I know I can always give you a call and say, Wayne, what do I do? But I'm not sharing that on our show, by the way. Your personal cell phone number.
Well,
Now I'll watch. I'll be getting phone calls. What's that phone number for Wayne? That guy who was on the show. Anyway, some of the other things I wanted to ask you is, how do we comply with the new lanyard requirement? What do I need to do?
My understanding of any boat that it does not have an enclosed cab, this is my understanding, and I'm not, everyone should check out their own stuff. But if you don't have an enclosed cab, you need a lanyard, and it should be hooked to your body when you're driving, especially if you're driving by yourself. I mean, I was in a partners with a whaler, and that boat was fast enough to throw you out if something went bad, if you lost steering or, I mean, it really doesn't take that much to pitch you out of a boat. And if you're by yourself, you're screwed. So wearing a lanyard is a good practice in any boat that you can be thrown out of. I rarely see people do it. I have people ask me to take them off. I won't do it.
Yeah. We had our previous managing editor actually got ejected out of his rib, small horsepower, hit a wave the wrong way, and boom, he went out. And he didn't have a lanyard, but that was his lesson after that, to start wearing a lanyard. And I've seen situations with larger racing boats where you're required to wear a lanyard that cuts off a dead man's throttle, that's what it's called. And I actually was there one day where a guy was ejected and the boat ran over him and ran the prop right up the guy's back. And it was a fatal situation. But if he had had the lanyard on, it would have killed the motor and not run over him. So it is a serious situation. And your worst fear is that your dinghy turns around and all of a sudden it's coming straight at you. You'd learn how to swim real quickly.
Or you watch it go away and you don't have a life jacket. And
right.
So that's
right. In fact, I carry a spare lanyard in the boat because I lost one once. And of course, it's a real pain in the neck once you lose one, because then you have to wedge that fitting open on the engine for it to run. Anyway, you get the idea. But if you go to buy a lanyard, buy two. Keep an extra one on the boat because they do get lost, and they're cheap. I think I paid less than $5 for it, and hard to find until you really need one. One question that's come up is, how do you what size outboard motor for particular boats? And I say that because I've seen some ridiculous situations these days, like these people who have a 350 Yamaha on their fishing boat, Wayne. But you make it work.
Yeah.
But what are the right sizes? I mean, for the different size boats?
You really need to go with the manufacturer's recommendation. The manufacturer has a maximum horsepower recommendation for any boat. And if you go outside of that, you're just looking for trouble. My 28 Kingfisher is actually a little under horsepower. It can handle 400. So now they're putting two 200s on them because the 350 has not been the most reliable engine on Earth. So
okay, all right.
Yeah.
We did get a question that came in on the chat line.
Yeah.
A gentleman asked, how do you wire up a lanyard to it? And I know how to do it on my engine, but what do you say to that if it doesn't have a lanyard? I don't know what you'd call it. It's a cutoff switch, basically.
It's exactly what it is. It's a cutoff switch. It's an emergency cutoff switch. And you can buy them at West Marine. It goes between your ignition and it just opens the ignition circuit to where your coil does not get juice. So it will kill the engine instantly when you pull that clip out. It needs that clip to keep the circuit closed and keep juice going through. So you can buy them and have any competent mechanic wire it to your dashboard or into your system. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's the answer to that.
West Marine has them for sure.
Okay. And we got a previous question for the show that said, how many horsepower per person so that a boat will plane? Which I think I know the answer to that, but go ahead.
I think that's going to depend on, it's certainly going to depend on the hull. It's going to depend on, on a lot of things. I don't have an answer to that question as far as horsepower per person.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that would be hard to figure out. Here's a good one that came in, and you know this one's coming. Wayne, why are some boats doing multiple outboards on the back?
Well, that's the up here in the Pacific Northwest. I can't speak for you guys down in Florida. I know you're down there now.
Yeah, that's true.
In Florida, that's a whole different thing. I call that wallet racing. That's just
that's correct. It is. I'm not a Floridian. I'm visiting, but that's okay. I agree with you.
I know. Up here, the idea of the twins in the Pacific Northwest is they're offshore fishermen. They're guys that are going out to where if you lost an engine, you have a backup. I have with that also comes, twice the maintenance, and I run one single 350 Yamaha. But I don't go out in the middle of the ocean. I'm not going 100 miles out into the ocean. I would really not recommend my boat would even be good for that.
Yeah.
It would be fine, but I think running one big outboard out there by itself would be a little foolish.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I think that's the right answer. Here's a good one. How do I prevent my outboard from being stolen? What have you seen the most effective way to do that?
Well, there's a couple of great ones. What I do with my 9.9, I have a kicker on my boat, and what I do is everybody has long bolts that are holding their motor on. Nobody's using the clamps. If you are using clamps, I would recommend bolting them on, and then taking a pipe, stick it over the bolt and just bend it. Figure you're going to have to cut that bolt off. Those bolts are going to have to get cut off. I beat on them with a hammer and then I bend them. Nobody's getting them off with a wrench. You're going to have to come after them with something. So make it easier to steal your neighbors. The other really good one I saw was I was at a boat place up here, and there was a dinghy on the dock that was pulled up, and it was obviously a work craft, but the motor, all the paint was burned off the cowling. And I said, oh my God, he had an engine fire. She goes, oh no, we burn all the paint off them so everybody thinks they won't run.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, she was making it really ugly. So everybody, I don't want that one. It probably doesn't run. So
okay.
Yeah, those are the two I've heard of.
Here's the classic question. I love this one. What do I do if the motor won't start?
Okay.
I think all of us have stood there on a manual start, pulling. If we had an electric start, we've sat there and let it grind away with the starter till the battery's just running out. What do you suggest?
Okay, let's start with basic one. And I've actually been on a call with a friend of mine. He said, Wayne, I just serviced my engines and they won't start. Please come help me. I'm at Cap Sanding. So I gather up a tool bag and I go off. I go, what's it doing? Because it's just cranking and cranking and cranking. You know, and what could he have done? You know, has he got airlock? You know, did he bleed the fuel state? So I take all my stuff and off I go. And get down there, I pull the cowlings off. Both motors, they both went out at the same time. And I get in the seat and go to crank it over. Both lanyards are laying on the floor.
Well, there's a good tip. Make sure the lanyard is in properly.
Right there. Yeah. Make sure the lanyards are hooked up. So from there, there's a couple tricks. If you're suspecting that it's fuel, the best thing to do is take your fuel line off and see if you can get some from your squeeze ball pumped into some kind of a glass jar or something you can see through. Because if you have water in your fuel or crap in your fuel, you'll be able to see it. Let it settle out. If it's ethanol fuel, it'll look cloudy and then it'll settle out and you'll see where the water line is. Okay, so now you know you got a water problem. You're going to have to get that fuel out of your carburetor, figure out what you're going to do with your tank and how to get it fresh fuel, and then you have something to work with. If you don't see anything, I found the best trick is to figure out if it's an electrical problem or a fuel problem. Take some ether and starting fluid and spray in it and pull it. If it lights, if it even hits, don't run it on the ether. It just confirmed that you have a fuel problem. If it won't run on ether, you'll have an electrical problem. So that's kind of the simple basics. And I use those all the time to figure out which direction I'm headed. So that's just a 101 troubleshooting thing. It's
So
not
we
new.
talked about fuel. What kind of electrical problems could you have?
Well, coils go bad, igniter or triggers go bad. There are things that go bad in the electrical system that I have had stator go bad. That's the actual generator on top of the engine that makes juice to fire the coils. Those are a little more difficult to diagnose. But first, find out whether you're hunting an electrical gremlin or a fuel gremlin. So
Okay. So the general thing is you need fuel, you need air, you need spark.
And compression. That's it.
And compression. That's right. Good point.
Yeah,
Compression.
you got or it'll run. You got to figure out which one's missing if it won't. That's
Interesting. And I had a couple questions about the future, and then I've got the great question about insurance to talk about. But what about diesel outboards? Are they real? Is this coming?
It certainly looks like it. Yanmar, I got that question from you the other day, so I actually videoed one, and Yanmar had a 50 horse. I don't know anything about them. I haven't seen one. I've seen the engines on the back of boats, but I've never seen one run or heard one run. But
The big question is, can we afford one if it's a diesel motor and an outboard?
Yeah, can you? It's going to be heavy. You're not going to pull it with a rope, that's for sure.
Yeah,
it's going to be pull start. They have challenges, but I mean, Yanmar has been building diesel engines for a long time. So I like the idea. I like the idea of diesel. I mean, it's just so much friendlier than gas. Gasoline is just it's so volatile. It needs to be well taken. That's all. We all do it. It's not to be taken lightly.
and bad for your business. But what about these electric outboards that are coming?
I don't think it's bad for business. My business model is not all that. It's not all that's cracked up to be anyway. But the electric outboards, I think there's a future there. I'm sure that there is. I mean, look where electric cars are going. The the lithium batteries and water certainly create a challenge. I had this big idea that I was going to do that with find a wrecked Prius and do this. And I phoned a engineer, my cousin, one of my nephews is an engineer. And he goes, Wayne, just Google lithium and water. He goes, just Google that. And it's highly explosive. I mean, like a cup full of lithium in a pool will pretty much empty the pool. It's that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's big. So there's challenges, but I don't think that they won't be met. I know that they will be met.
So another question that came up, are the new outboard designs that much better? And, you know, we've seen them go through electronic ignition and so forth, and I'm not sure what's next. You watch the Yamahas real carefully, and I consider them to be a leader. Are the designs that much better?
Yeah, I do think they're getting better. I think the horsepower ratings are getting a little ridiculous. I don't know how they can get longevity out of the horsepower that they're pushing out of some of these little motors. Now they're getting 425 horsepower out of the block that my little 350 is. Well, it's not little, but and then now I'm hearing about 600s and just crazy stuff. So I think the right answer to your question is, yeah, they're getting better. The materials are getting better. They're getting lighter. Like the new, I just got a new 350 this year, and it was about 100 pounds lighter than the one that I previously had. So yeah, they are getting better. I do believe that.
Good, good. And as we talked in preparing for this show, you had a great story you told me about some problems you had with your personal engine and what you discovered. Why don't you relate that to our audience?
I think that's a really good story because it surprises more people than not. So like I said, I have a 350 Yamaha it was a 2011. And not a motor with a great reputation, definitely has some issues. Yamaha knows it, has known it. So it's kept indoors in the winter, so it didn't freeze. It had no heating problems, no alarms. I never had any problem. Well, it comes up with water in the oil one day. And so I went and changed the oil once and flushed it out real good just to make sure it wasn't an anomaly from flush out, running too much pressure through the flush out hose. And then it came back, and eventually I started hunting it and did a compression test, and the number 8 cylinder was just open. It would hold nothing. A leak down test held 0. It would not even, I couldn't even get pressure in it. So I started pulling it down, and my friend says, why don't you call your insurance man? Well, so I do, and he says, well, I have an adjuster there, and he'll call you tomorrow, and you guys set up an appointment. So the adjuster comes out, he calls first, and I took the head off the engine, and there had been salt water in there to where one of the exhaust valves was rusted open. I mean, it was rusted in place. That's why it would hold no compression. Anyway, we looked at it together, and the motor was in need of a lot of repair. The cams, heads, the salt water had been in there to the point where it had taken the cams out and the bearings. So he asked me to get a quote on a new engine, and he wanted to know how much it was going to cost to repair it. So I called Bayview, and they gave me a good estimate, a nice written estimate, itemized. And it was like $22,000. And the insurance man, my insurance company, took $900 off of that estimate and paid it, which basically got me a new engine with my old lower unit on it, with me paying pretty much the sales tax. So that was, and most everybody I've told that story to, what, an outboard? You lost an outboard and, you know, it blew up and your insurance company, yeah, it's a catastrophic failure. And he couldn't say that it was something that didn't just happen. So don't be afraid to call your insurance man and ask them to take a look at a catastrophic problem like that, because that's not a little deal. That was a big hit, and I was quite pleased with that outcome.
Well, the moral of the story is we may have coverage that we don't realize with our insurance policies on,
Yes.
on our outboards.
Yeah.
And I've heard stories of similar things with a stern drive. My brother had a situation with his stern drive, and lo and behold, he caught a crab trap, and it was determined to be an accident, and the insurance company paid for a completely new Volvo stern drive unit. So the insurance, depending how it happened, may cover it. Don't be afraid to call and ask.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic advice, and may, you know, save our viewers a lot of money. So we're running out of time here, and this has all been fantastic. A lot of great information. I really appreciate your coming on. Any last words? Now you see all these problems, you get all these phone calls. What do you say besides your phone number? No, I'm kidding.
No. There's a couple of pieces of advice I'd really like to give anyone that's viewing it, because if you're viewing, obviously you have an outboard and you need it to run. So the very first thing you should do is take a picture of your serial number and your model number. It's found somewhere usually on the transom bracket. Get that in your phone, because that's more important than having an impeller with you, knowing what you have. Because you can make a phone call and talk intelligently, you can find somebody that can understand what's going on if you know what you have. Those numbers are imperative. And on my brand new 350, the sticker fell off.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I found it, but I've worked on brand new Mercury's. The sticker was gone, and you got to call Mercury and go through a lot of rigmarole. So get a picture of that, no matter how old or how new or what size the engine is. Know what you have. That's going to be your best friend. That number is going to be the first thing anyone asks you when you go, if you have a problem.
That number is also, by the way, critical for your insurance. They need to have that number if they're going to replace your motor. I just went through this with a small motor that my son has, and we had to, same thing, find that serial number. Yeah. What else, Wayne?
You know, I wrote some notes. Let me see if I can bring them up on my phone, because
fuel, what you said with using stable or an additive was right up there on my list of something I'm going to do next week when I get back to my beloved little outboard. What else?
If you're going to go get your small outboard repaired, I would recommend going into this thing, find out what it's worth, find out what the replacement value is on it, and find out, you know, come up with some idea what it's worth to you. It's like my friend Chris, he spent $2,000 on a $500 engine. He was happy as could be. I guarantee you that's not most people. It was a very specific thing on a race boat, and he just liked it. But that's, these little motors, you can get buried in them pretty fast. A carburetor's $300 if somebody doesn't know how to clean it or doesn't want to take the time to clean it. You can spend $300 or $400 on a little tiny carburetor. A stator, those things, they get pricey really fast. So go in kind of understanding what and then maybe draw a line, say, hey, can you do this for, I call my friends and go, hey, are you willing to spend $300 or $400 on this thing? Because, a little 3-horse Suzuki, that they've let sit around for 5 years and go, can you make it run? I go, yeah, I can, but it's not a 5-minute deal. It's a deal. So that's my what I would really like people to understand, going in, know where you're going and what you got and what you're willing to spend. Because that's very helpful to me. And if I don't think I can do it for that, I'll just tell you straight up, put this thing on eBay and go get another one, or do something different, because it can get really expensive pretty fast, and I don't like to see that happen.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And yeah, I know you well enough to know you don't want to be the bad guy or delivering the bad news. And if the patient is not worth saving, it's better that the customer determine that rather than you tell them. So
yeah, you may have $1 million memories of a useless motor.
yeah, exactly. The motor my dad gave me or something like that. Well, Wayne, this is fantastic. This is really helpful, and I think we'll save our viewers a lot of money. And I really want to help. Thank you for spending your Thursday night with us and sharing your brilliance. And I can tell you, working with Wayne, what you viewed tonight, this is what it's like. It's fun, it's informative, and Wayne is one of those that genuinely wants to help. So, and there are others out here like Wayne, but not as many as I'd like to say, but I can highly recommend Wayne. So with that wraps us up for this Thursday night for July 1st. I want to wish you all a great 4th of July. We'll be on next Thursday night. We're going to be talking about mooring balls in the state of Washington with a representative of the Department of Natural Resources. So we'll answer your questions of what you have about mooring balls. And many of you after the 4th of July weekend may be saying, how come we don't have more mooring balls out there? So go out this weekend, have a great time boating, and of course, be safe on the water. And with that, thank you very much. Good night. Thank you, Wayne. And we'll see you all next week, or see you out on the water. Good night.
Good night.